So here are some solid weapon and HELMINTH synergies for the new Warframe NOKKO. By the way, I humbly ask for your support by simply liking the video and subscribing if you find it informative. Thank you. And now, let's start this guide, beginning with Araxia's sidearm, called the scyotid. If you've seen my previous NOKKO video, then you already know that I'm looking for a good synergy on increasing the kill speed of his Spore Spring ability. This is just me, but I feel like I can do faster bounce to increase the kill speed. And the best way to do that is grouping enemies. Now, you all know that the scyotid has a second mechanic wherein you throw a web and group a bunch of enemies together. This is really a massive synergy for NOKKO, and it does in fact increase the kill speed of the Warframe. The best thing about the scyotid is that it's an outside buff, which means we don't waste any skill slot for Subsume builds. Another thing that I love about the sidearm is that it doesn't just group 8 enemies within 15 meters, but it's also good when it comes to applying statuses. Currently, I am using a utility build for this sidearm, and I have 166% status chance on my build. Mainly, this is a viral status primer build, as even if NOKKO has the ability to apply viral, it's not the same as Saren's Miasma, which can apply the maximum stack rapidly. Take note that Stinkbrain viral status applies per pulse, and it would take some time to get the full stack. With Scyotid, the additional viral stacking does help increase the damage of NOKKO's Spore Spring, and I can see constant numbers with millions of damage, especially if it's on 8th to 10th bounce. Now, I know that I have said that it's really hard to use HELMINTH builds for this Warframe, as his kit just works well together, but I just can't help myself think of other possibilities to increase the effectiveness and damage of the Warframe. Take note that these are only suggestions, but if you like more power for NOKKO, then I strongly recommend running a few of these HELMINTH builds. By the way, before we start, I would like to inform you that the skill we will be replacing with NOKKO is his reroute. So basically, no spy missions for most of these HELMINTH builds. As I have said in my previous video, reroute is great in spy mission, since it can bypass lasers and make you undetected from cameras and enemies. But in other missions, I don't really have a use for it, since his other abilities will take care of his survivability and damage. More specifically, his Spore Spring takes care of the damage, and his Mushroom then buffs the damage and gives you immortality thanks to his passive. So, I tried a couple of HELMINTH abilities before I finally got my 3 best builds. First of all, I tried Sentient Wrath for the damage vulnerability. It's also great for crowd control, but the thing is, sometimes the range is really bugging me in real mission. We would want enemies to be closer together, and when I cast Sentient Wrath, enemies 30 meters tends to get stuck with the floating animation, and it can't be reached by Spore Spring, so I decided to not pursue the combo. There's another damage vulnerability source, and it's Araxia's Web Embrace. But as you can see, I haven't feed Araxia yet in the HELMINTH system. But I think I'll be postponing the synergy, as it has the same mechanic as Sentient Wrath. The radius is good for Spore Spring bouncing mechanic, but let it see until I finish my second Araxia in the Foundry. I also tried Breach Surge, and it's quite good in crowd control, especially with the insane casting speed I have with NOKKO. But it's kind of disappointing when it comes to the damage side of the skill. I was hoping that it would be something like the Exodia Contagion synergy back then that can deal damage cap, but I was wrong, and Breach Surge does little damage to enemies, even with the boost from NOKKO's Bouncing Mushroom of Doom. Also, it's kind of wild and dumb at the same time, as I have tried Evade hoping that I can go with a Stealth Bomber synergy with NOKKO. I was hoping that there's some spaghetti coating involved on his kit, but there isn't a single one, as NOKKO's Spore Spring is considered a body hit, and the Mushroom don't actually bounce on enemies' head. So, this synergy is gutted. The best so far is subsuming Ensnare in his 3rd skill. For those who have watched my previous video about NOKKO, then you already know this. Ensnare is just a straight-up upgrade to NOKKO, as it really increases the kill speed of his Spore Spring. Airburst is also a good option too, but there's a crazier Subsume skill, and this is Mag's pull ability. It has the same use as Ensnare, but with slightly different mechanic, as pull will drag enemies and knock down them. During the knockdown phase, the Spore Spring will bounce only one time on the crowd, but once enemies gets back up, this is when the true magic happens. The Spore Spring bounces like it's a mad dog, killing all those enemies that are grouped by Mag's pull, which is really a satisfying synergy. Now, if you are contented with the damage of Spore Spring and don't need any grouping mechanic, then I got a couple of interesting HELMINTH builds for you. Anyway, you can still group without any Subsume builds using the first synergy I have shown with the scyotid sidearm. But the HELMINTH builds are just way more efficient in grouping, as it can pull a large crowd in one go. But if you're not interested in those type of HELMINTH builds, then you can also try damage and farming synergies. Roar is pretty obvious because it boosts the damage of Spore Spring. Also, with the high amount of power strength we can put to NOKKO without sacrificing any other stats from the build, you can easily achieve more damage numbers with Roar. But when it comes to damage boosting, I strongly recommend Sickening Pulse. So, what this HELMINTH ability basically does is increase the number of status stacks the enemies gain. You all know that NOKKO has the ability to inflict both viral and toxin status effect. When it comes to Stink Brain, you can immediately get the 10 viral stack if you cast Sickening Pulse. And for Spore Spring, you will deal another massive toxin hit after casting Sickening Pulse. In fact, in one my test, I deal a massive 4 million red crit damage with Spore Spring at the final bounce of Spore Spring after casting Sickening Pulse, which is kind of insane. Also, because of the huge damage to health from viral stacking, the enemies will get obliterated all the time by Spore Spring. Finally, you can put out a farming build for NOKKO. If you want to make good use of all that power, then I strongly recommend subsuming Atlas Petrify skill and using his Orgaze Augment. But for this synergy, we need to build 400% power strength, which means we will be trimming some casting speed in our Archon Shard setup. Also, we will be removing Steadfast and Arcane Energize. To be honest, both the arcanes are really not necessary because we have Bright Bonnet for energy regeneration. I just like my NOKKO to be at full energy most of the time, hence I have the arcanes. But a more specific setup, I just use other arcanes, and for this case, we will be using the Arcane Crepuscular and Molt Augmented for that extra power strength buff. Crepuscular provides 30% power strength, while Molt Augmented gives 60% at max stack, which will give this build over 400% power strength, enough to get double the loot drop against enemies that died while being petrified. To maintain our energy and keep casting abilities, I also included Equilibrium in the build setup. Since we are immortal while we have one mushroom in the field, I don't use Vitality in this build anymore. Also, we have Invisibility in this setup, so it adds more survivability. How do we get that, you asked? We will be using the Shade Sentinel for its Ghost Augment that grants cloaking while there are enemies within 24 meters. Mind you, the cloaking works as invisibility, so it can proc the effect of Arcane Crepuscular. This needs more testing, but I think the final critical multiplier, also of the Arcane, gives more damage to Spore Spring. I have seen huge numbers since using the Arcane compared to just having Molt Augmented. I also have used a 30% setup with Intensify testing the damage without the Crepuscular to see how much the damage of Spore Spring, and it seems that the extra critical multiplier is being added as I see higher number with Crepuscular compared to the 30% only strength boost from Intensify. So, that's all about it. Truly, I'm having tons of fun with this update, especially with NOKKO, and I hope these HELMINTH builds will create good and fun memory while playing this Warframe. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next guide.